My parents were very young when my mother became pregnant with me. They didn't have enough money to afford a child, and the apartment they had was too small for just two, let alone three. But they loved me too much to let me go. "What are we going to do with this baby, dear? We barely have the money to survive."
"Don't worry, honey. We'll do it somehow. I'll find a second job and we'll save on the light, at least as long as we can."
They tightened their belts, and when I was born 9 months later, despite still having serious financial problems, I was born into a family that loved me madly. Hi, I'm James, and for as long as I can remember, I have been an attentive reader. My parents noticed it when I was 3 years old when I started spelling. Father used to hold me on his lap while reading the newspaper. Until I started school, my mother took me to the library every day. The assistants adored me and treated me as if I was their own child. I would spend whole days there. It was a great deal for my parents, too. The shop assistants were happy to have me there, and this allowed them to work without worrying about the cost of kindergarten. When I started school at the age of 6, I was the only child who could read, but it was only in the 3rd grade that I revealed my true talent, writing. I filled my writings with fantastic stories, incredible tales of dragons, princesses, and knights, and let my imagination fly over boundless and imaginary terrains. My mother was delighted when she came to talk to the professors.
"Her son is a genius, madam. He has a real talent for writing."
My mother smiled and showered me with kisses when we got home. Over the years, I made a name for myself in my school and formed close relationships with a group of friends. We were close-knit and cheerful, and we built hilarious role-playing games on my stories. One day, we were playing at my house and having a great time when my mother interrupted us to bring us something to eat. "So guys, are you having fun?" "Yes, Mom, thank you," I said, taking a drink. My friends took the opportunity to read the story I prepared for them.
"Hey, James, have you ever tried to publish any of your work? Your stories are great."
"Yes, in fact, you should really contact a publisher." That was the spark that made me start thinking seriously about a job. You know what? I have a story that I could turn into a book. It could be my first publication. By the time we graduated, my book was almost finished, and my friends kept pushing me to publish it. Like them, however, I lived on the outskirts of a small town. There were no publishers where I lived, and the only way to resolve the situation was to move to some larger city and look for a job there. I decided to talk to my parents about it. "Mom, Dad, I need to talk to you."
"What is it, son?"
"It's been a few years since I started writing a book, and now that school is over, I would like to try to publish it. You know you might not get caught on the first shot, right? You will have to find a job and go to different offices."
"But if that's what you want, we'll support you. We don't have much to spare, but it should be enough to give you time to find at least one temporary job."
"Thank you. You are the best parents in the world," I said, hugging them. I was really a lucky guy. A month later, I was on my way to the city. I had rented a tavern in the suburbs, and with me I had only my suitcase, the best wishes from my friends and parents, and my dreams. But now I was alone, and I had to get by. Convinced that it would only be the first of many attempts, I took my writing to the first editor on my list. I did not expect to be accepted to interview, honestly, so when I arrived in front of the publishing house, I was in a cold sweat. I was wearing the most elegant clothes I had, but I felt like the worst beggar. The building, on the other hand, looked like a real spaceship, white and blue, shiny and luminous. I was increasingly nervous, and sitting in the waiting room, I found myself biting my nails. I was afraid my hands were sweaty enough to wet my cards, and the minutes never seemed to pass. It wasn't just my impression, though. The publisher called me in almost an hour late, and I was now on my nerves. He greeted me with an extremely serious face and a very cold tone.
"Sit down, James. You wrote us to submit your novel, didn't you?"
"Yes, sir, this is my writing," I said, and handed it to him. His gaze was so inquisitive it made me shiver.
"Yes, I read it from the email. I have to be honest with you, James. You don't have what it takes to be a novelist. But I want to be good and support the youth a little. I will publish a novel anyway, naturally assuming all of the responsibilities of the case, and I also propose a contract. What do you think?"
At first I was upset. Everyone had always told me about my talent for writing, and now it seemed that I had become the least of the least. My self-esteem collapsed. "Of course, sir, it would be a pleasure. What contract is it about?"
"A short story per week, and I'm making you an advantageous offer,"
he said, lengthening 2 sheets to sign, one for my book and the other for the stories. I was not really able to read it, but I wanted to trust, and signed up. I didn't know how much my job could be worth. "Thank you," I said, bending over. I don't know why, but I felt defeated. I went back to my room, rethinking the past day. I was still on the street, lost in my thoughts, when I slammed against someone. I hurried to collect the things I had dropped to the ground, and only afterwards I looked up. It was a very beautiful girl with long black hair and a look that was of fire. She seemed to have just come out of a job interview too, as she was dressed elegant with a beautiful red suit. Excuse me," I stammered, and I was already blushing. What a shame. "Don't worry, everyone gets distracted now and again. Have a nice day." In greeting me, she touched my arm, and surprised by the gesture, I woke up from my thoughts. Just next to me, where I had hit the girl, there was a bar with a sign hanging from the door glass. Personnel wanted. I looked at my copy of the contract and understood that the offer was for me, so I decided to apply. Within a week, I had started working both as a writer and as a bartender. My parents would have been proud, but I only felt exhausted. I thought it was just the stress of the first few days, but I still didn't know how wrong I was. Every day I worked from morning to night to keep myself in the city, and I arrived in the evening too tired to go out. Every now and then I called my parents or my friends, but I could no longer go out like before. I slowly forgot the beautiful evenings we spent together and the trips out of town. My days were marked by work at the bar and then other jobs to write those stories. When I called my parents, my mood was so down they began to worry and send my friends to check on me. They presented themselves almost every week, but I only seemed the shadow of myself. And when we played together, I was just silent while they were pushing the story. "Hey James, how about this character? What about this background? I'm sure you can give some good advice." But I was too depressed, sometimes to even answer them. "I think it's okay, but maybe the others can help you more. I have other things to do." I began to apologize. I didn't feel more comfortable with them anymore. But the truth was the way I lived made me feel too bad. Every time I introduced myself to the publisher then, I always felt worse. He looked at me with an air of superiority that made me feel tiny, and every time he said terrible things.
"Your job is only good for magazines. You will never become a great writer, but maybe you can get away with drafts. I would expect better from a boy of almost 20 years, don't you think?"
He went on for all weeks, and slowly I began to lose confidence in my qualities. The only thing that really raised my morale were the visits from Christina, the girl that I met on the day of my interview. She visited me almost every day at the bar where I work, and together we would chat for a long time. It was beautiful to spend time with her. "You know, you are really good with the cappuccino. I've only had one this good in Italy." "Thank you, but I think you're giving me too much credit. Rather, have you ever thought about doing some role-playing game?" I discovered between one visit and the other that she was a lawyer and that she worked on a study nearby. For this, they had met that evening. "So why are you here in the city?" "I'm trying to become a writer, but it's not going very well." "How come?" "Well, I went to a publisher, and even if he publishes my writings, it's like an act of charity." "Why don't you show me something of yours one of these days?" "I'd love that. Tomorrow, if you pass towards the evening, I'll definitely make you read something." The next day, when Christina read my book, she was amazed. "How is it possible they don't consider you up to par? This book is extraordinary. It has an incredible political intertwining, and the world in which it's set is so alive." It was when I saw the passion in her eyes while reading my writing that I understood I was in love with her. That vibrant fire in her eyes had totally enchanted me. "Are you sure you've made a good deal with this publisher? It seems to me that he's only exploiting you. How much did you say he pays you for the stories? And how much do you get from the sale of the books?" She asked me, and I blushed embarrassed. They paid me so little that if I hadn't had a second job, I would have ended up on the road immediately, but I was ashamed to tell her. But Christina understood immediately, and she asked me, "Would you also show me your contract? Just out of curiosity, don't worry. How about if we look at it together in a couple of weeks? I'll be on a business trip for a while." Obviously, I accepted. I was sorry not to see her for 2 weeks, but at the same time, the fact that she had approached me, it made my heart beat. That same evening, almost at closing time, some men entered the bar. I was not at the counter. I was in the back to fix the last things before returning home, and I was intrigued by hearing a known voice coming from the room. It was my publisher. As if caught by a premonition, I took the cell phone and began to record the conversation, remaining hidden behind the jamber of the door.
"Are you going well in this period, old man?"
"Yes, we see you've bought quite expensive things in recent times. This watch seems to be made of massive gold."
"What I am about to say must not go out these walls, but I think I have found my hen with the golden eggs. A few weeks ago, a young man came to me trying to publish his book. That poor thing really has no idea how a contract works. Not only did I make him sign a pact that foresees that 80% of revenues of the book go to me, and I assure you that that book will be a massive success in children's bookstores, but I also tied him to my company with a contract that provides for a very high fine if he should fail his weekly stories. It's perfect for me. Are you not worried that at some point he will realize the problem or that he can no longer keep himself in the city?" "No, I don't really think. He must have found a second job. Also, he thinks that his work is not up to our quality standards. He thinks I'm doing him a favor." The three men all laughed together. When they left that evening, James waited a bit to return to the street and wrote a message to Christina, forwarding her the audio of the conversation. "You were right. They're taking advantage of me," he wrote to her. "But now what can I do?" She called him that same evening and seemed in a fury. She promised him that when she returned from her journey, she'd defend him pro bono in court, and she would ensure that that dishonest publisher would bitterly pay for his errors. We saw each other for several evenings in a row, planning the next moves together, and each time we were getting closer. 2 months later, I won in court against the publisher with Christina by my side. And that evening, I invited my family and friends to eat at my house, not only to celebrate, but also to get to know my new girlfriend. A few years have passed, and Christina and I are about to get married. We live in a beautiful house thanks to my work and my girlfriend, and we regularly host my friends and parents. We are happy, and soon we will also have a child, but shh, this is something my parents still don't know. Who would ever expect it? That day when I was accepted for that interview.